The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Very interesting data about acceptance of homosexuality in the U.S. among some different groups. And we've talked quite a bit about attitudes from Muslims around the world towards homosexuality. And there's major cause for concern there, no doubt. But I want to talk about attitudes specifically within the United States. Pew Research has put out a new study. And the study finds that American Muslims are more accepting of homosexuality than white evangelical Christians in the United States. Since 2007, American Muslims have increased their acceptance of homosexuality from 27% to 52%. That is almost doubled. Meanwhile, white evangelical Christians have also increased acceptance of homosexuality, but way less, from 23% to only 34% in 2016, which is the most recent year we have data for. And you know that on this program, my desire is to follow the facts, right? If evidence points to female genital mutilation being a problem in Muslim communities around the world, I will tell you that, I have told you that, and I've gotten slammed by some people for that. If most terror around the world is perpetrated by Muslims, I will tell you that, and I've told you that, and many people don't like it. And along the same lines, if most terror in the United States is committed by white, non-Muslim men, as it is, I will tell you that, and many patriots haven't liked that. And a common argument against American Muslims is they don't assimilate. They don't mesh with our values. The truth, though, is that our country has become more and more accepting of homosexuality. The American Muslim community has doubled its acceptance of homosexuality, but it's the white evangelical Christians that are lagging behind in terms of accepting the direction the country is going as a whole. That's the data. That's the data. And here's the really interesting part that I want to talk about. This study asserts that persecution of Muslims after 9/11 in the U.S. has shown them why it's wrong to marginalize other minorities like LGBTQ individuals. That sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. And I've been thinking, well, do we have examples either corroborating or departing from that? Think of the Jewish community. The Jewish community has been one of the most persecuted in all of history, right? Kicked out of dozens of countries over a period of thousands of years, endless persecution. One of the most progressive religious communities today. You put aside conservative Hasidic Jews, which are a tiny percentage of all Jews, and the Jewish community has worked for the rights of all populations. Look at the Anti-Defamation League as an institution in favor of LGBT rights, African American rights at any opportunity. Would evangelical Christians become more accepting of others and defenders of others' rights if they were persecuted? I don't know, because they believe they are persecuted, right? They've been talking about the war on Christmas for a very long time, and it's not leading them to self-reflection that makes them say, let's stand up for Muslim American rights, let's stand up for LGBTQ rights, whatever. So I don't know that that works, where if you are persecuted, you realize the importance of defending all persecuted communities. Doesn't seem to be happening with evangelical Christians.
Well, it's interesting how some right-wingers make this argument that homophobia within some segments of the Muslim community is a rationale for, you know, legislation that targets them, or say Trump's Muslim ban.
Sure.
Now, putting aside the fact that since when are conservatives champions for gay rights? I mean, if that's your argument, then I guess white evangelicals should be targeted too.
You would think so. You would think so. And none of it adds up or makes any sense. And particularly interesting, I find this idea that you can single out the Muslim American community as particularly resistant to assimilation when it's the evangelical Christians that, at least on this particular issue, are resisting the trend and wave that we are seeing in the United States. I have no interest in putting out there any assertions about these issues that are not backed by data. I have no horse in this race, and it's really important to think about what the impact is of these blanket statements that we make. Check out the study. We're linking to it in the description to this YouTube video for this story. And you can also send me your thoughts about it on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Beth Del Nero. Beth, thank you so much for subscribing to the David Pakman Show. We can't do it without members, right? I mean, it's our number one source of revenue. So I encourage you, if you value the program, if you like checking out the program daily on YouTube or podcast or wherever, help support the production of the show by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership. If you're waiting around for a massive membership discount, August 12th, an email blast will go out to everybody on our mailing list with a gigantic membership discount. If you want to be notified of that, go to davidpakman.com and sign up for our newsletter, and then you will hear about that on August 12th. Very exciting. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Very much appreciate the closing in on 2,000 people that have made pledges. And lastly, you can support us with the Amazon shopping you do by going to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. Okay, why don't we go to the phones? I like the idea of going to the phones right now. 617-830-4750 is the number. We will try talking to our caller from the 917 area code. Caller from 917, if you can hear me, tell me your name and tell me what your question is today.
Hey there, David. My name is Michael. I'm calling out of New York City, and I was actually just calling about what Trump's administration might mean for the future of, the White House or politics. Like, do you see any future administrations possibly taking any leeway because of all the constant troubles that the Trump, administration seems to be in? Do you see anything like that happening?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Trump presidency and the way in which they've handled themselves completely upends what would be considered normal and acceptable for any president. So even if you imagine this as a blip in the radar and that right after Trump is done, we are going to go back to sort of politics as usual, which has many, many problems, but is far less ridiculous, I guess you would say, than the Trump administration. This has opened the door at the local, state, and national level for all sorts of insanity to be considered relatively acceptable, because what Trump is doing mostly is being considered acceptable by a lot of this country.
When we think back to Obama's tan suit scandal,
yeah.
I mean, that's just completely laughable now that Republicans would make that charge. If we have a Democratic president going forward, say one wins in 2020, and they try to levy that same attack, it's just going to fall flat on its face.
I hope so. But my main concern, though, Michael, is that Trump has set a precedent where now, like, maybe Kid Rock would be elected in Michigan, right? I mean, so I think that the door has been opened to seeing these clueless characters as possibly legitimate elected officials, and that's the scariest part to me,
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that for the voters, is this going to be a pattern? And in future elections, is celebrity going to be more now something not necessarily required for a candidate, but definitely sought, among voters? Because I feel as if, you have people like Kanye West and,
right.
The Rock all talking about possible, presidential ones. And it just seems to really be taking value, in my opinion anyway.
It's completely taking the value. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, this will only be useful if it makes us say, oh, yeah, we're never going to do that again. But the fact that Trump still has a high 30s approval rating suggests to me that there are many people who are very open to another one of these types of candidates. All right, Michael, thanks for the call. Always great to hear from our callers in New York City. Let's go next to our caller from the 857 area code. Caller from 857, tell us your name, where you're calling from, and what's on your mind today.
Hey, what's up? My name is Brody. I'm calling from Boston, and I had some questions about fraternities and how you felt about them.
I never have been in a fraternity. When I was at the University of Massachusetts, it was sort of, the fraternities were still there, but the entire frat area was ultimately destroyed. Like, every frat house was gone, and now I think they've put in, I don't remember what. It's never been a big thing. I went to frat parties, and I went to sorority parties, and it was all fine, but it was nothing to write home about, really,
Do you think they have a legitimate role in society given the high-profile deaths and other things, and sort of the antiquation of maybe those social networks due to, the internet?
I don't know how you define whether it's a legitimate role. I mean, I don't think they're necessary. I think there are all sorts of other community groups available to college students that, when combined with the technology, the internet technologies for being in touch with other people that now exist, sort of make sororities and fraternities irrelevant. And the fact that, there have been hazing deaths and all of this other stuff, it's just kind of like, why? I just, it's hard for me to imagine. I regularly talk to high school students who are about to go into college. And the mere mention of looking into maybe joining a sorority or a fraternity, I never hear it anymore. And 8 years when I started speaking to high school students, I did. So I think it's kind of evaporating, although I don't know if membership is down nationally.
Yeah, I went to a school with very little Greek life, and I didn't really care about that. And now, being out of college, I don't look back in regret for not being part of a fraternity. I just don't care.
Same here.
I was in one, but I don't know. I'm wondering if they have relevance in the modern college age.
Yeah, fair question, Brody.
Right on.
All right,
Hey,
great
Pat,
to hear from Boston callers. Appreciate that. And very, very interesting stuff. Let's go next to a caller from the 617 area code. Caller from 617. What's your name? Where are you calling from? And what's on your mind today?
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm from Needham, Massachusetts, and I wanted to talk to you about the giant humanitarian and political crisis in Venezuela.
Yeah.
So their president has been doing giant power grabs all over the place, giving himself unchecked power, arresting political opponents, and it basically seems to me like they're on the road to a revolution there. So I wanted to get your take on where you think that whole situation is headed and what the U.S. and maybe other countries can do to soften the crises they're having.
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, and the situation continues to develop. And so to be totally clear, there's, as I mentioned, Alex, there's a contingent of the left that is sort of like the apologists for the Bolivarian revolution, meaning Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro. And a lot of it has to do with antipathy towards American foreign policy in Latin America. And they are very quick to say any opposition is American-funded AstroTurf, and Maduro is actually being framed as being much worse than he is. But as I mentioned earlier in the week, I've been following media reports from non-American media in other South American countries that have been doing really good investigative reporting, and it's really bad down there. It's really bad down there. So the question about what the U.S. can or should do, I don't know that that's the right question for me to answer, because I don't know that the U.S. necessarily can or should do anything. I mean, they can do things. I don't know that they should. Whether they're on their way to a revolution or not, I think is an interesting question. You know, when you look at the bogus nature of those elections that were called, the arrests of opposition leaders, the intimidation of adversarial press to the extent that it even exists, and it's very even difficult even to say what that would be. I believe that Nicolas Maduro is a disaster. I believe that Hugo Chavez was a disaster. I think that this is an authoritarian right-wing dictatorship couched as some kind of left-wing socialist populist revolution. And I don't know why so many on the left in the United States have kind of fallen for it, but I hope that Maduro is out sooner than later. Now, that being said, that doesn't necessarily answer who should go in, because there's no question that the U.S. has played a role in getting involved with opposition leaders in Latin America. It's often not gone well. So that's a sort of different question. But if you've been following what's going on with hunger, access to basic food and supplies, toiletries, currency, hyper devaluation, it's an absolute and total disaster. So I'm following it really closely, Alex.
All right, thank you.
All right, great to hear from Alex in Needham. I've been to Needham before. Not too far from our studio here. Let's try 717. What about the 717 area code? Caller from 717. What's your name? Where are you calling from? And what's on your mind today?
Oh, wow, I actually got on. Yes, my name is Logan. I am from Annville, Pennsylvania.
All right, and let's turn Logan up, Pat.
And oh, I'm, I'm I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Now we can. Yeah, go ahead.
Is this better? I was on speaker.
That's much better. No speaker, please, to all callers.
Yeah.
A disclaimer. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just wondering, the fundamental idea, whether you think he's a hypocrite or not on this, of kind of the isolationism idea that Donald Trump has with trade. Maybe I might even go a little further and say just full-on non-interventionism. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it could work? Limiting trade, limiting outsourcing.
Yeah. So listen, here's the thing, Logan. Here's the thing, Logan. Yeah, I think I got it. I think I got the question. This idea of total isolationism is sometimes appealing when it comes to foreign policy conflicts or involvement in the conflicts of others. But what Trump completely lacks an understanding of is the way that we actually, as an American economy and the people of the United States, depend on many of these relationships with other countries, even to just fund our day-to-day life. So when Trump talks tough with China, Trump seems to completely ignore that if we really alienate China as a trading partner, a ton of stuff is going to get way more expensive for the American people. Now, if the products that people get that are produced in China go way up in cost, yes, there will be somewhat less purchasing of those products, but there will be people who will continue purchasing those products at a higher cost if maybe they're American made or made elsewhere. And then they will have less money to put into the businesses that are right here in the United States. Or they might start spending less on homes, or they might spend less on cars. And it will directly impact in a negative way lots of other businesses that depend on American spending. So the idea of the caricature of isolationism and build it here and buy it here and forget about China and forget about all these other countries that Trump has, the guy doesn't know anything, right? So to the extent that we should take it seriously, and I don't know how seriously we should take it, it's sort of like libertarianism taken to the extreme. It's a joke. The same type of isolationism Trump is talking about, taken to its full conclusion, is also something that would be terrible for the American economy, period.
Yeah, and actually one other question. Now, what if in this scenario, now completely take Trump out of the picture because he would never do something like this, but what if we were to what if on top of raising the prices, now we all have like American-made products, but what if we were to increase the minimum wage, thus would increase like wages above that? So like if you raised the minimum wage to say $20 an hour, and subsequently like the value of the American dollar would probably go down, but people would be able to purchase a more of the more expensive American-made products.
Got it.
I think in this sort of hyper fantasy world that would work.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to run the numbers on that. I think that it's barely worth discussing. Whoa, as my chair almost tipped over. Barely worth discussing right now because it's not. Your question so surprised me, Logan, that my chair almost went completely off to the side there. That would have been an interesting moment on the show. It's just I wouldn't even think about it in those terms right now. But as I mentioned, by the way, the dollar has been falling. Trump talks only about the Dow Jones Industrial Average is way up. Of course, only half of Americans even have stocks or something like that. But the dollar's value going down is something that directly impacts way more Americans. So very good questions, Logan. We will continue thinking about these issues as they are very, very important. Let's go to our next caller from the 207 area code. Now, if I recall correctly, 207 is the Portland, Maine area, although I'm not totally sure. 207 caller, tell us your name, where you're calling from, and what's on your mind today.
Hi, David. This is Terrence. I'm calling from the Portland, Maine area, so you're correct.
Thank you.
And they're here. And I just want to keep maybe the show light, and maybe you could have this as a new segment where it's celebrities and their doppelgangers or lookalike. And I'll start the first one with, hopefully I won't get assassinated, but have you ever noticed that Melania Trump and Jenner look alike?
You're talking about Caitlyn Jenner?
Caitlyn Jenner could be a twin for Melania Trump.
You know, that's not that crazy. That's not that crazy. Yeah. What other ones you've got here, Terrence?
The other one would be for you.
Okay.
And I think that you could be a stunt double for Kirk Cameron.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I don't really see it. I don't really see it. I know some people do. I mean, I was born with really curly hair. I don't know if he still has it. I think on Growing Pains he had the curly hair. My hair has gone straight. I get the ones I commonly get are Kirk Cameron, the male porn star James Dean.
Oh, of course.
The guy who plays Mr. Shu, the guy who plays Mr. Shu in Glee, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Those are the ones I get most often.
Yeah, I think Kirk Cameron makes sense too because you both know Ray Comfort.
Yeah, that's true. That's a fair point. Yeah. You have any for Pat, Terrence?
I just want to say I appreciate for Pat. Pat's got his own style, and you know, you just can't duplicate perfection like that. So way to go, Pat. You're your own.
Pat's gotten Sally Cohn. CNN contributor Sally Cohn is one that Pat has gotten a bunch of times.
For the longest time, I thought I didn't have one, and then I discovered Sally Cohn.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Terrence. Well, listen, we will research and we will do side by side.
I appreciate your guys' work, and thanks for everything you do. Put up the 2x2 of Melania and Caitlyn and see how many responses you get.
We will do that. We will do that. All right, Terrence, thanks very much. Always great to hear from our friendly neighbors to the north of Maine. Mostly friendly, although Maine has some pretty rural areas where they are hard right, like full hard right. That's it for calls for this week. We will take calls again, that I promise you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, so in light of Donald Trump's recent Twitter pronouncements about banning all transgender military service members from serving in the military in any capacity, I thought that it would be a good time to go back to my interview from October of 2014 with Brett Jones, who is the first openly gay Navy SEAL. I don't think that the connection requires any more explanation. Brett did go into how he was actually interrogated about his sexuality when he was in the military. Don't ask, don't tell plays a role in our interview. And just think about what Brett Jones told me back in 2014 in light of Donald Trump's clearly expressed desire to ban all transgender military service members from serving in the United States military. Let's get into that interview now. I'm joined today by Brett Jones, who's a former Navy SEAL currently living in Alabama, where he and his husband run a business together. Brett, I've been really researching and reading about your story over the last couple days, getting ready for our interview, and there's so many interesting elements to it. Let's maybe start at when you first had the idea that you might want to get into the military.
Okay.
So tell us about that.
Well, I remember I was living in Egypt at the time, and I overheard a conversation between my father and my brother. And my father at the time was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was an ambassador's aide there at the embassy in Cairo. And he came back and told the story about how he wasn't even allowed to see these guys called Navy SEALs. And, you know, at the time, he really didn't know a whole lot about them. He had heard of them in Vietnam, and for some reason that planted a seed in me that it was just neat that, you know, even my dad wasn't allowed to see them or know who they were.
And what year did you finally join up?
I joined the Navy in 1993.
And then what was the path from joining the Navy until you were ultimately part of the Navy SEALs?
Well, it was a path kind of riddled with a lot of obstacles. I went through, I joined the Navy, went through boot camp, and then my A school, and then from there went to BUDS, which is the precursor for SEAL training. And I didn't make it through my first time. I went to Iceland as a Navy policeman, did that for a while, and worked really hard to be able to get the opportunity to try to become a SEAL again. And the second time I went through, I made it, and that was pretty much the path to get me. You know, obviously, you get to your SEAL team, and you still have about 6 months worth of training and advanced training to do before you become a SEAL. But that initial 6 months of buzz training is the toughest.
So in the background of all this, of course, there's your sexuality. And you of course, had to have been aware of what the policy was in the military back in 1993. What impact or how did that kind of interface with your desires to be in the military? Is that something you thought about?
Yeah, I definitely thought about it. You know, when I joined, they had the don't ask, don't tell policy was sort of new.
Yeah.
And I knew instinctively at the time that it was kind of a load of crap. So I just knew going in that I was going to have to do a lot of lying.
And is that what it was? Was it, some people talk about their experience in the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell as being more, I guess, don't ask, don't tell in the sense that they didn't directly feel that they had to lie. They kind of felt out of place when there may have been conversations where they may not necessarily have felt included based on their sexuality, but that direct lying wasn't really a part of it. But for you, it was.
Oh yeah, it definitely was. See, the thing is the SEAL team community is a very tight-knit community. There's not very many of us, and so you spend a lot of time in that very small environment. It gets very difficult to keep a lie like that or a secret like that from the guys you work with.
And what kinds of situations would there be where you just had to just lie? Well,
I remember a lot of the guys kept asking me, about any girlfriends or anything like that. And I remember it got so bad that at one point a friend of mine actually posed as my girlfriend to a couple of the get-togethers that we had in the SEAL teams.
So this wasn't in pictures. This was she actually would show up places with you.
Yeah. It was like a comedy. It was probably a comedy of errors more than anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can understand why there's this kind of funny element of it looking back, but at the time, was that difficult for you?
It was. Obviously, just like anybody, you don't want to, especially to those guys that, we were so close, we were like brothers.
Yeah.
And, lying to them it was a terrible thing. It made me feel really bad that I would ever do that to them.
And I'm guessing it wouldn't have been necessarily your choice, right? I mean, did you feel that this is just the way it had to be because of the policy?
Oh, it definitely had to be that way. The don't ask, don't tell policy. It was a don't get caught policy is all it really was. It was a nightmare. It was a mess.
Were you out to your family at the time that you joined the Navy?
I was.
And what was that experience like? In other words, was that is that something that you did right away, or what was the timeline of that like?
I came out. I was sort of outed. My mom overheard a phone call that I had with a friend of mine who was gay when I was, I believe, 17. I was fairly young, and it didn't go well. Like I said, my father was a colonel in the Air Force, and they were very religious, so they felt very strongly against it. And it wasn't a very good coming out. In fact, I got kicked out of my house.
And then ultimately, were you allowed back in? What was that period of time like?
It was tough. It was probably one of the most toughest times of my life. There was a lot of heavy thinking after I got kicked out of the house, and I did eventually move back in with my parents just prior to me joining the Navy, but it was tough. I learned a lot though. It wasn't all bad. I think in any situation where bad things sort of happen to a person, you kind of grow and learn from it and become a little bit stronger.
Now, since your dad was in the Air Force, he, of course, must have also been aware of what the policy was. So were there conversations with him about your potential risk situation?
I honestly don't recall a specific conversation. I think it was something more that we just didn't talk about. In fact, after that, getting kicked out of the house, we didn't talk about my sexuality for years.
And when you, before leaving the Navy SEALs, had you come out?
Yeah, I was forced out of the closet. Let's see, that was 2001, or no, I'm sorry, yeah, 2002 rather. I just got back from doing a 6-month deployment. We deployed 2 weeks after 9/11, and I got back, and I was the person I was living with at the time, who I was in a relationship with, had this big party for me for coming back and being healthy and all that, and I drank a little bit at that party, and then the next day, I woke up and I had realized that before I went to bed that I probably didn't spend as much time with him as I should have. Instead, talking with other, people at the party. And I called his office and left a message on the machine. And one of the people that worked for him heard that message, and it was somebody that he had recently just counseled. So she reported it, and that was all it took for the Navy to launch a full-scale investigation.
So there was so quite literally there was an investigation into your sexual orientation by the Navy.
Yeah, yep. It lasted for months, actually.
And it's amazing to me, how could it last for months when it seems like it's all about asking you, as absurd as it is, what's your sexual orientation and getting an answer? In other words, why did they need to? What was being investigated?
So the don't ask, don't tell policy is just that. It's don't ask, don't tell. So, they're trying to figure out ways to get me to tell. I remember, right when I came back off of the deployment, I met with the investigator and, or I'm sorry, actually, I went to a free fall school, and then I came back from that, and that's when I found out about the investigation. And, it was an interrogation. It was about 2 hours of her trying any which way she could to get me to say that I was gay. Fortunately, I got put in touch with the SLDN up in D.C. Just prior to that. So they prepared me for the questions that they were going to ask me and the tactics that they were going to use.
Can you give us an example of what types of questions they would ask to try to get you to say something?
So they had done their research. They found that we had bought a house together and that both our names were on the house. And so they would say stuff like that. And somehow they were able to find out about a vacation that we'd even gone on. And, asked, different questions, like, why would you buy a house with, this guy? Or why would you buy plane tickets to travel together to this place? Or, it was stuff like that.
And how would you answer those questions?
I told them that by the direction of the lawyer, I said, I don't feel comfortable with that question, and I need to discuss that with my legal counsel.
Looking back at all of this now, I mean, what's your view on it? What's your view on don't ask, don't tell having been repealed? I mean, to me, it seems like just almost an immoral waste of resources that could be put into so many other things.
Looking back on it, it's honestly, it's a really sad part of our history, but I'm actually glad that it's history now.
Yeah.
But it's really sad. I remember going to gay bars or whatever while I was in the Navy, and I could just see, somebody that had been, kicked out of the Navy for it. This is the thing, is getting kicked out of the Navy. I mean, they would try to dishonorably discharge you, which is like being a convicted felon in a lot of states. And so you could just see the shame on some of these people's faces that you talk to and you hear their story, and it was horrible. And it really is a black eye in our history, I think, just because there were so many people. I believe, like an average of 300 a year in the Navy alone were kicked out under the don't ask, don't tell policy for being gay or lesbian or transgender or whatever. And it was... it's sad because these are people who really just wanted to serve their country.
Of course. We've been speaking with Brett Jones. The name of the book is Pride, the story of the first openly gay Navy SEAL. It's from Dog-Eared Publishing. Brett, really a pleasure having you on. Thanks for telling us your story.
Thanks for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've had some really good audience questions. I feel like we've had a solid month or 5 weeks in a row, Pat, where it's just been fantastically good audience questions. And that is no different today. Our first question is from Danny. What is absurdly overpriced in your opinion? I have a lot of thoughts on this. I mean,
Sure.
It depends how we want to approach this. Most things in America's biggest cities are very, very overpriced. And this includes everything from apartment rent to real estate to a lot of services that depend on human labor.
The rent is too damn high.
The rent is too damn high, as Jimmy Williams told us back in, when was that? Was that 2012, I think?
Sounds about right.
The 2012 presidential primaries. Anything that you would buy at the movies, right? Like a soda or popcorn at the movies, that's outrageously overpriced. Internet in the United States, internet that is not even that fast, I find to be overpriced in the United States. It really depends on what you're talking about. There are cocktail bars now in Boston where a cocktail costs $18. That's outrageous to me. That just seems crazy, particularly when if it costs 18, you'd better not tip $1. You'd better tip at least $2. You're talking about a $20 cocktail, really. We're talking about a couple bucks in ingredients. Couldn't you get away with charging $11 for that cocktail, which in many parts of the country, by the way, would still be very high, but no longer in Boston? Like, you expect to pay $11 or $13 for a cocktail at any reasonable cocktail bar. There's such a long list of things that are absurdly overpriced.
I guess, but I mean, if people are going to these upper end restaurants and bars, they can afford to pay it. It's okay with me. You know
That's a
what I mean?
market defense. It's a market apologia.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up popcorn and movie theaters, and you can even extend that to like a beer at a ball game, for example, because obviously those are going to be highly priced. It's highway robbery. But you know that going into it because they have you by the balls at that point. You already paid to get in there. You paid for the cost of admission. You're not just going to leave and get that somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you're going to just either pay or not get it at all.
What's the most expensive sports item price you've heard of? Like from anywhere in the country?
$12 beers at ball games.
Wow. That's outrageous.
For like a little cup, like a, I don't know.
Right. We're not talking about like a 10% alcohol imported unique beer that you might, like a larger one particularly that you might get at a beer bar. You're talking about like a 10-ounce cup of Bud Light or something like that.
Oh, well, maybe. I mean, if you're going to pay $9 for a Bud Light or Coors Light or a Miller Light, why not just spend an extra $2 and get something that's actually tasty?
What about a lot of like health and beauty products, like various creams? I actually met not that long ago with the CEO of a men's cream and shaving products and shampoo company. And he basically told me there is very little cost difference in any of the creams you see. Like a lot of the creams are marketed specifically towards women, but not all. And you see tiny little containers of an anti-wrinkle cream sell for $20, $30, $40, or even $50. And really the differences, the CEO told me, between these products comes down to texture of the product, scent of the product, and then marketing. The physical container that these creams come in and the marketing around it. But that really there's only a handful of actual ingredients that are used in so-called moisturizers or so-called wrinkle preventers or decreasers or whatever the case may be. That seems like quite a racket to me.
Well, it's going after markets where these people are very sensitive. So let's say you have wrinkled skin, for example, which is obviously natural and not something you should be ashamed about.
Sure.
You may try to get a quick fix at first, buy the $10 cream and it doesn't work. And then you find a $50 one and think, well, this is 5 times as expensive. If anything's going to work, it's going to be this.
That's one of the ways that in economics we consider, even though supply and demand are sort of independently determined in total rational neoclassical economics, you can actually impact demand based on the supply. You can increase prices artificially or decrease supply artificially to create the perception of a luxury good. So if Mercedes came out with a $17,000 car, and you know what, they might have one in Europe. There's really small Mercedes and Audi and whatever in Europe. But let's say Mercedes came out with a $17,000 American car. It might do well, but it might not, because part of what makes the brand of Mercedes-Benz attractive is that it is expensive and that people associate the fact that it's expensive with better quality. And this is something that could be happening with the creams, which is no, let's create the perception that it is better by making it more expensive. And I think that's sort of what you're alluding to.
Yes, definitely. Another example I would give is college textbooks, I think, too. Because let's say you're paying for your kid to go into school. It's their freshman year.
Outrageous.
You're already signing a check for $50,000 to have the tuition and to have them live there or anything else. So if you're paying, $200 plus per textbook, it doesn't seem like it's that much more, but of course you're getting ripped off. I mean, that's not worth that much money.
I announced earlier this week that I will be a professor. I am going to be Professor Packman at Boston College starting in the fall.
Is that how I should address you?
By all means, address me that way, and people in the audience too. And I will not be requiring any textbook purchases. I'm creating an electronic reader where I am going to get a combination of scanned individual chapters and online articles and whatever. I'm not going to participate, Pat, in the college textbook industrial complex.
It's always pretty sketchy to me when the professors would have their own books on the list of required readings.
I've had many classes like that, yeah. Let's go to our next question from Huma. Not Huma Abedin, presumably, but a different Huma. Uma. I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced. What food do people commonly think is healthy but really isn't? Okay, I've got one idea that's kind of a joke, but then lots of others. Carrot cake, it has the word carrot in it, and people are like, hey, it's really vegetables. It's not really vegetables. It's sort of like whether ketchup is considered vegetables, which was a thing, I believe, under Ronald Reagan and the school lunch.
Isn't
something.
Pizza a vegetable?
Or pizza being a vegetable. I don't know.
I call it a vegetable.
Carrot cake. Now, I do sort of take issue with the concept of a healthy food or an unhealthy food, because a lot of it has to do with sort of moderation. And I read some really good articles that reject the idea of anything is fine to eat in moderation. That's not necessarily true. There are things that are just genuinely not good for you, but the concept of an unhealthy food, a healthy food, a superfood, which we've talked about, I don't completely agree with that sort of delineation, but I think we can apply some of this to these fruit juices where they say, hey, you've got 100 oranges in this 20-ounce juice. That's an insane amount of sugar. And what you really need to consider is people say, well, I'm getting so much vitamin C. You're going to pee out a lot of that vitamin C. The body has a limit to how much vitamin C it can absorb in a 24-hour period or in whatever period. But you are taking in a lot of sugar. And even if it's unrefined sugar, it's still a ton of sugar.
I mean, I guess whatever, if food being healthy or not could be dependent on what else is in your diet and if you have any needs that you have to get from other sources, right? Another thing that comes to my mind is maybe like breakfast cereals, because they try to market those as a healthy way to start your day. But then you take a look at the ingredients and there's a bunch of like food colorings and preservatives and it's all like processed grains. I mean, that can't be too good for you. Corn especially too.
There's a Calvin and Hobbes strip, and I grew up with Calvin and Hobbes. I recognize I couldn't rattle off every Calvin and Hobbes strip, but if you show me one, I recognize every single one. I still remember every single one. There is one where Calvin gets these chocolate frosted sugar bombs or something like that, and he gets obsessed with them because he wants to get some little toy that you can get if you eat enough and get enough barcodes to send in. And at some point, Hobbes suggests that it might not be that healthy, and Calvin says, well, it's part of a balanced breakfast. And then Hobbes looks at the box and it says, yeah, it's part of the balanced breakfast pictured here, which includes, 2 gallons of orange juice, a dozen fruits, as well as scrambled eggs.
Nice salad and
like the amount of food that you would need to balance it out might be 2 weeks worth of breakfast food or something like that. Yeah, I think that the breakfast cereal is a big racket.
How about salads too? Because I mean, you think that is completely healthy, but then if you add like bacon bits and cheeses and a dairy dressing, that's not healthy anymore.
I've seen this abomination of a salad called the wedge salad. I don't know if you're familiar with this. You basically take a head of iceberg lettuce and you cut, I think it's like a quarter of it. You cut a quarter, so you've basically got this wedge, right? Yeah. So first of all, iceberg lettuce, it's of almost no nutrition. It's basically nothing.
Go with the kale or the spinach or the arugula, whatever else.
You put this wedge of salad on the table, on the plate, and of course that has 0 calories. And then you cover it with blue cheese or gorgonzola, I don't remember which one, ranch dressing, and bacon. It's a salad, folks. It's a nice, healthy salad, except 99% of the calories are from all the other stuff, and you're barely really getting any vegetables there.
That's getting nefarious too, because I'm sure people eat that wanting to lose weight or
Maybe.
just change up their diet in a certain way, and they think that it's a healthy thing being a salad. It's not.
It's not. Yeah. Anyway, we could go on for days. Do you have any others you want to mention?
That was it.
That was it. Okay. The Starbucks Frappuccinos and stuff. I mean, we're talking about basically ice cream in coffee form, and I've talked about that. A lot of those are, it's like eating an entire meal, and people are like, I'm going to go grab coffee. Like, really? This is what you call coffee? But I'm not going to do that entire rant again. Pat's waving me off from doing that entire rant again. Brett wrote in, what normal childhood activity becomes uncool or odd when you reach a certain age? How about running, right? When I was a kid with my cousins in Argentina, hey, let's run. Sure. You just run everywhere. Wherever you're going, you run.
You have a lot of pent-up energy.
A lot of pent-up energy. If now I were to, when I'm just, I don't know, walking to the subway stop, run at full speed with my lunch bag and stuff, that would start to be odd, wouldn't it?
You would look like you were incredibly late for something, and if you had to speak to someone and they asked you why you're running late or something, and you said, no, I'm just doing this for fun, that would be very strange.
Do you have any others of what is considered uncool? I mean, like, a lot of people talk about how adults shouldn't really play video games. I don't have a problem with adults playing video games, and I think it's an unfair one because video games as we know them now were not something that prior generations of adults grew up with. So just because adults didn't used to play video games, I don't think is a good reason to suggest that there's something kind of odd about current adults playing video games.
I don't think video games are any different than, sitting for a couple hours and watching television, reality shows or what have you. If it's just something you do in moderation for entertainment, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
I mean, my mind goes to maybe like high school age where kids maybe start smoking pot or getting involved in drugs or drinking. And at the time, in some circles, that's considered the cool thing to do. But, if you're doing it to excess when you get older,
it's like, what are you doing with your life?
You start looking like a deadbeat a little bit.
Yeah. And the high school one, and even younger, there's a point at which when you make fun of other kids, you're sort of seen as the dominant and powerful, and it's sort of like something to be respected and thought of as a really great thing. Like, wow, this person's running the show here. Very quickly, and it's sad that it doesn't happen earlier, but certainly once you get to college by and large and in the adult world, when you're regularly making fun of other people, whether it's even behind their back or in front of them, it transitions into being actually something that you want to stay away from people like that. It's really not the cool thing to do anymore.
And it doesn't even have to be making fun of someone. It can just be like being obnoxious, trying to see who has the biggest personality in the room.
Yeah.
And if you're out in public doing this, I mean, I see kids doing it all the time. It's just annoying to everyone else. And I think that's something that for most people starts to fade away when you become an adult.
You would hope.
But to those who don't, they're just seen as really annoying.
What about nap time? Like, nap time is a thing for little kids.
I
Like,
love
babies
nap time.
sleep all the time, whatever. At a certain point, nap time becomes really lame, but then it becomes cool again when you're older. Like, we've now seen the productivity benefits of napping throughout the day. And now I don't actually think that nap time is stigmatized. It seems like it's an in-between thing. Like, if you're in 7th grade and you're like, I got to go home to my nap before soccer practice or whatever, there's big stigma with that being very uncool. But at a certain point, that one actually goes away.
Yeah, I was dozing off there, so I didn't remember what you were saying. But what about like when you're 12 years old and you get like a new bicycle and you're riding around with all your friends on, say, your new BMX bike? I mean, that's the coolest thing because you get to use the roads just like as if you were a car or had a car with a license and everything else.
Sure.
But then you get to, obviously people use bikes as a hobby or to commute, but it's not seen as the coolest thing to do, maybe.
Oh, I don't know. I disagree with that.
Okay.
I'm totally fine with urban biking. I go for bike rides all the time.
No,
I think
I'm totally
saying
fine
uncool.
with it. I just don't think it's considered cool, like riding a motorcycle or like a fancy car.
Oh,
and I'm
okay.
someone who'll ride a bike around the city. I don't care.
Yeah, I don't agree with you on this one.
Okay.
No, I don't agree with you on this one. Let's end on that one to see what the view is now.
I mean, I'm not
biking.
offending anyone.
No, I don't think it's offensive.
Okay.
I just think it's wrong and misguided. But we'll talk about that
That's
off air, Pat. Yeah. Okay. Those are some ideas. Send me your thoughts. Great questions this week from Brett, Huma, and Danny. We will talk to you on the bonus show at davidpakman.com/membership. 1 week to go until David Pakman Show summer vacation. Just giving you a heads up. The show is not going off the air after next week. We will just be on vacation. I'll speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.